All right, everybody. My name is Matthew Taub. Welcome to the Unapologetically Jewish podcast. Today's guest is an incredible guest. If you haven't heard about him, you are probably not paying attention to the right podcasts or the right news outlets. Our guest today is Casey Babb, the director of the Promised Land with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and International Fellow with INSS in Tel Aviv. Casey, thank you so much for joining me today. I know you've been so busy doing all the work you're doing, so we're going to jump right into that. Let's start.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and looking forward to it.
All right, so let's just jump in. What are you doing now? Because a lot of people don't even know what the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is. What do you do there? What do you do at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute? What do they do?
Yeah, so the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is a think tank in Canada based in Ottawa. Probably, I think it's safe to say, the premier think tank in the country. And the program that I run, which I developed with the founder of it, is the Promised Land. And when we say Promised Land, it's a nod to Israel, and it's an acknowledgement of the Jewish community in Canada. But we're really talking about the promise of Canada, the promise of the West and of Western liberal democracies. And so the program that I run, that's really what we're focused on is combating anti-Semitism, sounding the alarm about rising extremism across the ideological spectrum, and really trying to restore some of the order that has been sort of lost or that has eroded over the last few years. And many of these things, of course, began years and years, decades before October 7th. But as Brian likes to point out, and I agree with him on this, October 7th was really the spark that set everything in motion. For instance, recent data that has been released by B'nai B'rith really underscores that. So that's what we're working on. We're working on trying to restore the promise of Canada and like-minded nations. And we're tackling a lot of these issues through the prism of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish bigotry, because, as you know, really this first sign of a social decay, in my mind, is how minority communities, specifically the Jewish community, is being treated. So in our view, if Jews in this country are not being afforded the rights that they are entitled to, this is a threat not just to Jews, but to all Canadians. And so we're trying to fight that. And that's really what keeps me, busy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think people realize it. We say it a lot, first again for the Saturday people and the Sunday people, but really that's just the small little play. It's coming after the entire Western ideals that we're fighting and the pushback that we're getting on everything we're fighting. So that it's so amazing that you guys are doing that, and it has been decades. I said October 7th brought us to the game that we didn't know we were playing. But I think at the time we landed, we got brought into the bottom of the 8th. I think we're now in maybe the top of the 7th. Then we pulled it back a bit, but the game's still in the final third, right? We have a lot more work to do. So how are you tackling that? What are you doing to expose and bring that to the right people? Are we bringing it to politicians? Is it bringing it to the media? Like, I know in my conversations with media and with politicians, especially, half the time I have to say, I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat. We've been through this before.
Yeah. What we're trying to do is address this issue from as many fronts as we can, through as many means as possible. That includes long-form papers, research papers. We have one coming out on pay-for-slay programs that I think is going to be quite impactful, and that will probably get quite a bit of uptick in the media because, of course, there's a nexus there to Canada, those really appalling programs. Long-form pieces, op-eds all over the world in the leading newspapers and outlets across the globe. I have found that typically issues in Canada, whatever they may be, get on the radar of Canadians, not when they are discussed in Canadian media, but when they are discussed and highlighted abroad. And this is part of Canada's identity crisis, which I talk about all the time. But that's something that we're big on, getting pieces out there, getting content out there about domestic issues in foreign media outlets like the Wall Street Journal and the Spectator and the Hill and Newsweek and so on. We do live events. We've had amazing intellectuals and journalists and writers and thought leaders come to Ottawa or Vancouver and Toronto. Everybody from Dr. Einat Wilf to David Hirsch and Lawai Al-Sharif, among many others. We have the podcast, which we run, which again, we've had some really phenomenal people on there. Melanie Phillips, we just recorded a podcast with. We have a podcast coming up, an episode I'm recording with one of the world's, maybe the world's leading expert on the Muslim Brotherhood. We're trying to do as much as possible. We're doing webinars. We do events on the road where we go out and speak to people of different faith backgrounds and ethnicities and so on and so forth. I'm hitting the road with Loai al-Sharif. We're doing a number of events together to talk about interfaith dialogue and peace building and Jewish-Arab, reconciliation and so on and so forth. So it's really, we're trying to do a lot, and we're trying to do a lot of the work that other organizations are not. And I think it's interesting because we're not a Jewish organization. And
Right.
we're just a Canadian organization. So I think that's actually one of our strengths. But yeah, we're out there and we're trying to do our part. Some days it feels like we're making a real difference. Other days, you zoom out and you go, geez, we're really up against a tsunami of lunacy here. The madness of crowds is a real thing. But I think by and large, we're having some real successes and we're doing work that most others are not.
Right. Well, I'm finding that's the case. Well, I know our organization, yours obviously much more established, doing a lot more. We're doing the things that others aren't. Now, why do you think that is? Is it that the other organizations don't know of it, don't care for it? I know I'm looking at what triggers me and how I think I need to behave and act. And I've got 3 kids. I'm doing this for their future, not just ours. And I want to bring back, Canadian values back to what we grew up with. The toothpaste is not going to go back in the tube now, but how do we make it better? So that's where I choose what I'm going to do, but where I think my organization is most effective. So how do you choose what's most effective? And do you think we're doing this because other organizations don't want to, aren't equipped to, don't see it, or is there something else?
Yeah, I mean, on the first question, how do we choose what to do? I think, one of the great things about, a place like Macdonald Laurier Institute, for instance, is that it's been around for a while now. It's been around for 15 years and it's tackled other major public policy issues. And so we have data, we have a record of what's worked, what hasn't worked, what resonates with people, what doesn't. And we're able to take a lot of that and channel it forward into this program. And that's why I think we're getting results. You look at the Melanie Phillips podcast, for instance, we got to have 100,000 views already. We're reaching literally millions of people with the program because I think we've figured it out, and it's always a work in progress, of course, but we've been learning for 15 years. And so I think that's how we've determined what issues we're going to tackle, what issues we're not. But in terms of actual substantive topics that we address, the issues are so acute and so in your face, as you know, that you almost don't have a choice. Like, the issues present themselves to be addressed. It's not like we have to go looking for them. They're right there. They're in front of us telling us that we're going to kill you. So those are the issues that we're trying to address. And, one of the big things that we're really focusing on, and which seems to resonate with people, is reminding people that, again, to the first part of this conversation, these aren't Jewish issues. They're everybody's issues. And I do think that is, people are waking up to that, even just on basic, on a very basic level. On some of the more, frankly, less concerning things, people are going, I'm really tired of this. Like, I think people
Yeah.
are, the average Canadian is probably pretty tired of seeing Palestinian protests, if that's what you can even call them. They really come off as anti-Jewish,
Yeah, that's all they are.
celebrations and hate-filled marches across city. I think the average person sees that and just rolls their eyes and goes, I wish, I've had enough of this. They're probably tired of reading about anti-Semitism, and they're probably going, this is like really getting out of hand. Like, what's going on here? I think so. People are waking up to this stuff. I think that there are still a lot of people, millions and millions of people, who are not aware of these issues to the extent that they should be. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're really just trying to sensitize Canadians to these things. And then I think a lot more will follow. But that's where we are. Like I said, the issues, they land right in front of you, and you have no choice but to address them. Well, I suppose you do have a choice. A lot of
You do have a
organizations
choice.
don't. That's where we are.
So when you look at, you just mentioned a lot of organizations aren't. Do you think the larger organizations, I mean, I look at it where, the last 60 odd years, 75 years, been what they've been saying are a golden age for Jews. In the grand scheme of 3,000 years, I'm looking at more like this is not a golden age, but a blip. It was a golden time, but there was something bubbling underneath behind the scenes. And we were raised in an era that the organizations do X, Y, and Z, and there wasn't a lot that we had. There weren't fires that we saw in front of us. God, I personally see it as it's gotten to the point where some of these organizations are just too big to even deal with it. Are there things that they're missing out on that they could be doing, should be doing? For social services and many things, they do great things, but this is a different fight. We're not fighting anti-Semitism from the '90s with white nationals who are also still there. I think people need to realize white nationals are still there, but this is 30 years later, and it's a bit of a different fight. Are they not equipped? Are they like? What are your thoughts there? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to clarify something for the listeners, and if any of the major Jewish organizations, catch wind of this conversation or listen to it, I don't. It's not that I'm anti CIJA or
Yeah,
B'nai B'rith or federations or whatever. No, I that's not how my mind. I'm not for or against these organizations. If anything, I'm probably more supportive of them than I am not, because they have a role. They have a role.
absolutely, and they're
Yeah,
needed.
yeah, and they're part of an ecosystem that is that they play a key role in. And one thing that really grinds my gears, so to speak, is intercommunal disagreement and friction. I don't think it serves us really in any capacity, unless we're talking about certain loud Jewish voices who are vehemently opposed to Israel's right to self-determination, who are consider themselves to be anti-Zionist, who are really weaponize their what little Jewish identity they may have to the detriment of the broader Jewish community. Then I think we have to take it to those people. But when it comes to the big organizations, my issue is that we're facing the most problematic situation in a generation. I mean, I've written about this in the Free Press. I just spoke about this on Haviv Gur's podcast, as we talked about before we hit record. And these organizations are not meeting the moment. I mean, the odd tweet or post about not letting an individual into the country because they have a history of terrorism or terrorism related offenses. This does nothing. This does nothing. We keep one grain of sand out of the country. It's really, I don't know what we're doing here, playing whack-a-mole with these little things. We need to get real, and we need to have honest conversations about who are the threat actors in the country. And I think for me, it's not that these organizations are too big, it's that they're just too afraid. They're too comfortable. They receive millions and millions of dollars a year. All of the executives make, you know, 50, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 a year. There's an equilibrium, there's a status quo that the thought of disrupting it is more uncomfortable than the thought of this country being destroyed. So that's what it seems like. And
Yeah.
so to them, evidently, they're not going to speak clearly about the threat of anti-Zionism. That's just too, I think it's too radioactive for them. They might throw off that equilibrium a little bit. It
Right.
might lead to a bit of agitation internally or some discomfort or some anxiety. They're not going to talk about the fact that a large portion, potentially the majority of really heinous anti-Semitism in this country and throughout most other countries in the Western world is coming from a segment of the Muslim community. They just can't, they don't know how to address that, and they would rather just keep talking about anti-Semitism instead of where the anti-Semitism is actually coming from. And in that, there's no remedy, there's no solution. And so it would be almost like if you kept going to a doctor's office and they kept telling you about an illness that you had, but they never talked about the treatment for that illness or the underlying causes.
Right.
You'd
Yeah.
kind of be going, I think the average patient would be going, like, okay, I know you're telling me I have this illness. Everyone's telling me that I have this illness, and this illness is affecting everybody around me,
Hmm.
but no one's telling me why I have it or where it's coming from or what we can do about it. And so that's my frustration. It's not that I think these organizations are bad organizations or that they don't have
Not
good
at
people
all.
in them.
No.
They have great people in them, but they need to be more afraid of inaction than they are of saying the wrong thing or saying something that could create a little bit of controversy. Most things that are worth saying or worth talking about are not the most comfortable things. Oftentimes they are hotly debated issues, controversial subjects. So we have to get real about those things. But one thing that's given me a lot of hope, and I think this is felt across the country, is that in the aftermath of October 7th, so many people created these grassroots organizations, some small, some actually growing in size and influence, that are part of a new era, a new age of, Jewish activism and advocacy. And it's been great to see that. And so, I like to think of myself as sort of part of that. And you're part of that, of course, as well. But that's where I am in terms of, you know, the big organizations.
Yeah. Which is true, and again, they do right, and you hit it nail on the head on every part of that, and I think that's why grassroots like mine and others to seek, like, we've come forward on doing things that we see are missing that we can do. We can mobilize quicker, we can do quicker, and we're not as comfortable because we're
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
And I think a lot of the criticism that certain individuals and organizations get is frankly overblown, in my opinion. And I know certain people will listen to this and roll their eyes and go, yeah, he's so off on this. But, you look at some of the criticism directed at, say, the ADL and their CEO. I think he's great. I've listened to him speak in person. I've spoken with him numerous times offline. I've looked at ADL research. A lot of it's really great, and a lot of it has an impact. So there are those organizations that get criticism that I really a level of criticism that I don't think is constructive at all. That I don't think it's warranted. And then there are other organizations who are doing incredible things that are not getting the attention they deserve, like what Michael Levitt is doing at Friends of Simon Wiesenthal. I mean, this guy is like arguably the premier leader and voice for Canada's Jewish community. And he has an incredible team and they're doing really wonderful stuff and people don't talk about them enough. They really should be. So there's a whole spectrum here. I don't have all the right answers, but I know that as we approach 3 years since October 7th, we can look at the data and go, okay, so things are clearly not improving. So we need to keep talking about these things and we need to keep working together if at all possible.
Yeah, that's right. Talking about Michael, I was with Michael actually 2 nights ago at an event, and we're at our table together, and that's what we talked about. How the things he's doing is different, and it really is. They're hitting things that people aren't talking about, but they're doing. And he said it really well. We know what our lane is, and we're sticking with that lane, and we're going to keep going as best as we can. And it really is amazing what they've done and how they continue to do it. So I give Michael a lot. So I'm always a lot of the credit for the work they're doing. And really, I hate saying this, but not staying in their lane, but knowing what their lane is and knowing what they are good at, and they hammer it so hard. They're really doing a great job, not just in Canada. They've also done things down in the US as well to help bridge that gap. So they're doing some great.
Absolutely. I mean, they have a name to live up to, and I think they're doing that. So
Yeah.
no, it's
I
great
think,
for
I
them.
think that's a driving force. When you have that name to live up to, it makes a difference. Touching on things like, the percentage of Muslims who are coming in, and that's who we're dealing with that are causing these issues. The biggest conversation that we've been having, and I've done since October 7th, I've done more reading and more research on things I never thought I'd ever read about. I'd ever voluntarily read about. I've got 3 different books on the Brotherhood. I've
Mm.
got books on Islamic Jihad, contemplating one book that's out of print, that if I want to get a copy of it, it's $1,300. Is the book that important to me right now? Because again, knowledge is power, and if we don't know who we're fighting, you don't know why we're fighting it, how are we going to win a fight? So the Muslim Brotherhood, the states are talking about it, and I really want to talk about this. People keep on saying that we have to ban the Brotherhood. Now, I've said this before: banning the Muslim Brotherhood is like banning a belief in the Tooth Fairy. You can't ban an ideology. I don't know many people who are card-carrying members of the Brotherhood. Granted, there are organizations who are aligned with, very well aligned with, especially here in Canada. We have a couple, more than a couple, but we have ones we know of wholeheartedly. My take is that we can't ban an ideology, but we need to ban access. That's how I see it. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on dealing with the Brotherhood? Because that's really what's dictating, from what I've understood, a lot of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough, nut to crack here, right? The Brotherhood. I think the Brotherhood is one part of the puzzle. I think we need a complete reset socially on what we as a people are willing to tolerate and indulge. We have individuals in this country and abroad that are using our own ignorance against us and our own freedoms to take away our freedoms. And every Canadian should be horrified by this. And I've mentioned this before. There's this clip of the great Douglas Murray that people can dig up. I think he's on the BBC, and he's talking about the threat of radical Islam. And the interviewer is trying to box him in and essentially try to make him look Islamophobic, which also is a word that we need to do away with for a variety of reasons. Oh, and by the way, the people that have told me that are Muslims. What we need to do, going back to the Douglas Murray idea or quote that he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, was that even if it's a fraction of the Muslim community that harbors views that are antithetical to our way of life and that are anti-Semitic and anti-Western and anti-women and anti-LGBTQ and so on and so forth, extremist. Don't we owe it to ourselves and I don't know if Douglas says this, but this is what I'm saying. Don't we owe it to ourselves and all of the many great Muslims who have come here, who just live amazing lives here and peaceful lives and contribute to it? Don't we owe it to all of us to root out the extremism, the extremist camp within that community? I mean, this is something that I think we need to get real with. And we also need to stop indulging every sort of argument or effort that comes our way that is put before us, whether it's targeting Jewish schools or Jewish camps, and people are kind of entertaining these ideas as if this is part of some sort of intellectual debate worth having. It's not. Like, people have to wake up to these sorts of things. So, I'm not answering your question directly about the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood's part of one issue. I don't know for certain if what effect listing them would or would not have. Another issue, right? You have to have the teeth to back up the listing of entities, and I'm not sure if we're in a position to do that right now. Nevertheless, I think the first step is to start having honest conversations about these things and, having a reckoning with ourselves and our own identities about who we are and what we've probably gotten wrong in the last couple of decades, and what we're going to have to do to change course here. That's my sort of 2 cents on that. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people, my sense is that they'd rather just not deal with it. They'd rather just pretend that it's not happening. And they're probably of the view that, these things will just work themselves out naturally. And history shows that no, that's not really how it goes. I mean, I've said this many times before. In Canada, and maybe throughout the West, we have this attitude of like, well, that'll never happen. Like, that's crazy. That'll never happen. We're not immune to the Brotherhood. We're not immune to radical Islam. We're not immune to right-wing white supremacism or left-wing extremism, which is a real issue that we need to get serious about. These are going to affect our way of life more and more unless we do something about them. And so yeah, it's not going to be an easy path, but if we don't act, it's going to get worse.
We have organizations like yours and mine on a much smaller level
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
other, are these the answers? Like, how do we raise that alarm bell? You're doing great things. What you're doing. How do we get this to the people I think it needs to be heard most by? Often, many Jews need to still hear it, but how do we get this across the country and really hammer it home that it's really is a national identity issue that we have to fight as well? Like, we're hiding behind all these things, and I think you look at the education, like, there's so many things that have been happening that I think have come to this perfect storm point, because it didn't just start on the 7th. It's not just 2.5,
Mhm.
3 years old. This is, like we said, decades old. It took us decades to get here, right? You know,
Yeah.
how do we get out of that?
So for me, my approach to this is, look, like, I don't have the one. My answers to dealing with a lot of this are probably for another conversation because they revolve more around, leaning into Jewish tradition,
Mm,
Jewish storytelling, Jewish rituals, Jewish identity, and so on and so forth. Whereas what you and I are talking about is, what actual pathways we can create and build to counter some of these damaging trends. And my thinking on that is still in the early days. I'm probably like a lot of other people where I'm scratching my head about this and I'm trying to come up with new ideas. For me, fundamentally, I really hope that listeners taking this in understand that each individual voice matters and has an impact, and that cumulatively over time, and I think about time typically more along the lines of our adversaries than I do with the average person, in that when I'm talking time, I'm not talking 5 or 10 years. I'm maybe talking several generations. Get tired of this stuff and don't be afraid of speaking about it. Ask yourself, what is the greater risk? if I say something about these issues and I show that I'm not really willing to tolerate it anymore, or if I stay silent? What's going to be the bigger problem
Right.
for you or your grandchildren's grandchildren? In terms of actual, policy measures and so on, there are, I think, pretty straightforward public policy issues that could be addressed, like immigration and a couple of others that we're working on at MLI. But when it comes to actually broader social changes that need to happen, I think people just need to start sensitizing themselves a little bit more to this and wondering about it and, embracing the discomfort that is going to come with um, righting the wrongs that have sort of crystallized over the last 30 years.
Okay, so it's a good place to start. Just take some time to get there. But you did, before you got into this, you did mention a whole other episode we can do about Jewish tradition, Jewish culture. Our organization is called Unapologetically Jewish. So we're going to jump in that for just a couple of minutes
Of
because
course.
I think it's important. I'm a big believer, especially for the Jewish community, that being unapologetically Jewish. I was raised very simply: put your head down, do your work hard, don't make waves, and we'll be fine. And here we are. So I'm very big on how do we get our community to stand up and embrace the culture we have and really hold up to those levels. So give me your thoughts on that. We can definitely do a whole podcast on that, but we should, let's talk about, just a few minutes on that, because I think it's important to
Yeah.
bring it back to the forefront.
Yeah. I talked about this in Halifax recently at the congregation Shar Shalom there a couple of months ago. Right now, we're seeing something in the Jewish community that really we haven't seen before, at least not in this way. And that is, you know, Jews, particularly younger Jews, just sort of going like, is the juice worth the squeeze anymore? Like, I can't really deal with this. I can't put up with this. I don't know what to think about Israel. I don't know what to believe. I'm being gaslit everywhere I go. It's Israel, Palestine. I just want to live my life. I'm sort of done. I'm walking away from this. Whereas like our parents or our grandparents and our bubbies and zadies, if they were called, some racist word or they dealt with a little bigotry or anti-Semitism to a certain extent, it sucked for sure. And sometimes it was dangerous, but the attitude was not typically, I'm just going to stop being Jewish. It was,
Yeah.
I'm Jewish. This sucks. I'll just carry on and, keep living my life. So that's something that worries me. So I think it's important right now for people to actually be unapologetically Jewish and to not hide and to remember that the Jewish world now, despite everything we're talking about, this is the strongest Jews have ever been in history. The homeland has been returned. It's one of the strongest countries in the world. It sets unbelievable example for Jews around the world in terms of how they should live their lives in a variety of ways. And the days of trembling knees are long over,
Long gone.
gone. And so we need to embrace that. And even in that sense, there's some discomfort that comes with owning and accepting strength. I mean, we're a very strong people, powerful people, and we do have a lot of influence and we do have a lot of autonomy. And I think for a lot of people, we don't know how to grapple with that yet because of the sort of ingrained multi-generational victimhood that we've learned to accept as our sort of destiny. And that is not our destiny. It's over. And so
Yeah.
we need to get real about anti-Semitism. I'm not saying we need to, if we pretend that there is no anti-Semitism, we're going to be in a really bad situation. We can do both. You can address anti-Semitism at the same time as being a strong Jew and having a strong Jewish household. And I'm not saying that, you need to study Torah every day and go to synagogue every week or, be Shomer Shabbat. But there's something about lighting the candles on a Friday evening
Yes.
that does something to me, at least.
I find that it brings a warmth and a protection. I don't know, like that I get that feeling of that warmth and protection every Friday night.
100%. There's, do I expect people listening to this to start wrapping tefillin every day? No, but what if you do it once a week or once a month? I mean, you might feel different. Maybe buy a book on Zionism or pick up the Torah, or go to a service, or buy a new Star of David necklace. Do something that to remind yourself of who you are and the people that you come from. Because I think a lot of folks in the community are so seized with anti-Semitism that they're almost forgetting the power and the wonder of Jewish tradition and Jewish history. And so that's sort of one of the things that I would like to see a lot of people do. And in that, we'll probably see more confidence and more cohesion when it comes to addressing the threat of anti-Semitism.
It's amazing. So after I'll tell you two things. So after October 7th, my son, who at the time was in second year university, went to school, typical university student, poli-sci student, went to school work, he decided to throw a kippah on his head. And here we are. He came back last month right before the holidays, and now he's going off the yeshiva in the fall. So
Wow.
he went complete, which I love. I mean, it's
Mazel
amazing.
tov.
That's it. That's what he embraced, and that's what took him and gave him the answers he was looking for. Do people have to be going to yeshiva, Lubavitcher yeshiva? No, but doing a bit more and being proud of it, and whether it's wrapping tefillin once a week, once a month, or lighting candles, whatever it is, it's something that we got to remember
Yeah.
that we do. And going back to the trembling knees, I actually got a call for, I'm sure you've been paying attention to the news, and the Toronto police are being accused of anti-Semitism, and I have a tribunal challenge, a human rights challenge against them as well for anti-Semitism. So yesterday I did an op-ed piece calling, pointing at all the issues that have happened over the last little while in the last 2 years and I said, now it's at this point in time with all these other things, not just Jewish issues, but systemic issues. I think it's time for the chief of police to step down or be replaced. It's an op-ed. It was my opinion. I had fact behind it, and I actually got a call from somebody, a religious gentleman, saying, I just read your podcast, your op-ed. Are you sure is calling them out like that the best thing to do for our community? And I said, listen, I'm happy being the stick. Somebody else can be the carrot. I do believe that being loud and calling things out that we see them needs to happen. So where do you think you stand on that? On not what I did, but in general, being that we have to be proud, and we've tried the diplomatic route. I didn't turn around one day and say I'm against the police. I support the police left, right, and center wholeheartedly. I like to see them do more for everybody. So I tried the easy route, that didn't work. I tried the friendship route, that didn't work. So I've been at the wall.
Yeah, yeah. I think, there's a spectrum and everybody has to do what they think is best for them and their family and their community. And some people, they're going to have more of a stick approach, and some others might have more of a carrot approach. But my thinking is that a lot of the answers to our questions, which I don't have for you today because I'm still on my own journey, I think that they can be found in Jewish history and in Jewish tradition and in Jewish ritual. Not exclusively, but I think there's probably more in there. There are more lessons in there than the average person, Jewish or not Jewish, is aware of and thinks about. And so, for me, I don't want to say, everybody should be out there and being loud and proud, but you can be proud. Maybe
Yeah,
you don't have to go to a counter protest. Maybe that's not your thing. It's frankly, it's not my thing.
I don't go to them.
Right. Or that sort of stuff, or being adversarial, if you want to put it that way, or, there's always going to be people out there to do that. And, I think it's important that we have those folks in our community, but just remember, if you're listening to this, that we do have some strength right now. There is a great sense of unity after October 7th.
Yeah.
Um, there is a great sense of pride. And so let's lean into that and tap into that. And I think a lot will flow from that over time that will be really beneficial for our community.
And that's amazing. It really comes down to pushing that of we have to be proud. And that's
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 it.
the biggest part. And listen, October 7th was an eye opener. It was horrific. It still is horrific. It gave us what I believe to be, a global shtetl. We're more connected now than we were 3 years ago,
Mm,
right? We're having conversations with people that we weren't having before. And I think we need more of that. And even looking at, you mentioned our grandparents, my Zaidi and many of our Zaidis had a massive, huge high coming down in their chest, right? I now understand why they had it, right? We made fun of
100%.
it. They had it. It was massive, and it was for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So, embrace all of that and certainly be Zionist and embrace Zionism and, don't unequivocally support the state of Israel regardless of what happens there. But don't let anybody gaslight you into believing that we're the bad guys in the world, and that
Yeah.
Israel is the sort of international pariah that it's made out to be. This is complete bullshit, and I really wish people would try to see through this and try to exercise a bit of clarity and self-preservation, because we're going to need all of that, and we're going to need strong people if we're going to get through this period in time.
We do, and I know we're cutting it close to the end of our time here, and we didn't even a chance to really talk about anti-Zionism, but we know what that is, and that's a whole other episode on its own. What would you give me a 30-second clip that you can kind of explain the best way for us to adopt it into our vernacular so people understand it? People are saying it, but I don't think we understand it. Is there a way?
Anti-Zionism?
Yeah.
Yeah, anti-Zionism is a hate movement, and it is a word that has been sort of created and accelerated by and adopted by Islamic fundamentalists and Soviet propagandists. And over time, that has been really, it has really taken root in progressive circles and throughout certain segments of the Muslim Arab community. And people will treat it as an outgrowth or a natural response to Zionism, which is framed incorrectly as some sort of ethno-supremacist ideological or political project. That's not what it is. And so anti-Zionism will be framed as just a natural thing to counter an evil. And it is not. It in and itself is the evil. So it is really a movement that wants to turn back the clock on much of what we talked about, Jewish sovereignty, Jewish independence, Jewish self-determination. That's the objective. And crucially, and a lot of people don't talk about this, there is no Judaism or Jewish history without Israel, and there is no Israel without the Jewish world. These are two things that are connected and will forever be connected. And Israel is part of the Jewish history, thousands of years of Jewish history. And to the anti-Zionist, if they can weaken that relationship, then they can weaken Jews and Israel in their own silos. And so we can't let them do that. Maybe the next time we'll talk about Zionism and anti-Zionism. I've nearly done my book on Zionism. So maybe when it's out, we'll talk about this. But
Absolutely. We'll definitely be doing that.
that is anti-Zionism in a nutshell. If you want to know what it is and you want to stew on it a little bit more, it's the most dangerous hate movement in the world. That's what it is.
Amazing. And we're going to stop it right there. That was perfect. And I thank you this has been an amazing, amazing time with you. And
Thank you so much for having me.
I
You're doing
appreciate it.
fantastic work and keep going. We need more of it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Stick around for 1 second. I want to thank our guest, Casey Babb, today. Again, if you aren't following him, make sure you are. Sign up. You have a newsletter?
I do not have a newsletter, but you can find me on X at Dr. Casey Babb or on LinkedIn or on my website, CaseyBabb.
And I do share a lot of your stuff. So look what I'm sharing, and we're going to talk to you soon. Thank you, everybody, for listening, subscribing, share this with as many people as you can so we can get the message out there. Again, Matthew Taub, this is Casey Babb, Unapologetically Jewish. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
And I'll see
Matthew.
you next.
Bye.